Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records. And this is Vinyl Monday. Oh my god, get these sunglasses off me. Welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the series where once a week I just sit down and talk about albums that I love. If this by chance is your first time here, I'd say all of this is a dead giveaway for what band I'm going to be talking about this week. We're talking about the Rolling Stones, and this week we're covering Sticky Fingers. I am so excited to be talking about the Rolling Stones again, and this record in particular. So excited, in fact, that I filmed this week's episode before last week's episode, before Sgt. Pepper's. Yeah, Sgt. Pepper's is a monster album, and I needed all the time I could get to research that record. So I filmed this episode ahead, and then filmed Sgt. Pepper's, but you got Sgt. Pepper's first, and now you're getting Sticky Fingers. Whew. I'm also currently working around some pretty significant renovations over here, possibly scraping ceilings and all of that nonsense, so you're getting past Abby right now. More past Abby than you usually get. If you want a preview for what album I'll be talking about for the next Vinyl Monday, go to my community tab. I post a lot of fun stuff over there, behind the scenes, polls, Q&As, all sorts of fun stuff. It's a great time over there. I'm also very excited to be featuring some covers by Margot Cotten in this video. You should go check out her channel. It's linked in my description. She does some really cool covers. My personal favorite of hers being the covers of Rolling Stones songs. To me, it feels like a super cool interpretation of broken English era Marianne Faithfull singing Stones songs. It's awesome. Go check them out. Let's take the plastic off. Oh, so excited. My copy is an original with this amazing album art by the one, the only, whether you love him or you hate him, Andy fucking Warhol. My copy has one of these nifty little zippers. It's pretty beat up, but there are the flaps to reveal the briefs as well. Please store these with the zipper down if you can at all help it. Mine is sort of stuck and won't really go up and down anymore, so I just keep this down. If yours by chance isn't, please go pull the fly down. Turns out putting a real zipper on an album cover was pretty damaging to the records inside, so after a while they just started making these covers without the real zipper. Turns out it's also pretty expensive to print all of your records with a real zipper inside of them. Who would have thought? This art was censored in a number of territories, but it didn't suffer quite the same fate as the Beggar's Banquet toilet cover. So we're not totally sure who is modeling on the front of Sticky Fingers. I always assumed it was Mick Jagger. This is a very Mick Jagger thing to do, but apparently it's not. This could be the brother of Warhol's lover in the 70s. This could be one of the designers working at the factory, or this could be one of Warhol's superstars. We have no idea. I do love me a good rock and roll mystery, and the cover of Sticky Fingers happens to be one of them. I'm not a huge fan of Warhol personally, as an artist or as a guy, but you gotta admit, Warhol had a pretty significant impact on rock and roll history. If you open up the gatefold, you will see the briefs in all of their glory, but I can't really show you that on YouTube. I'm already running on some pretty thin ice showing you this cover situation to begin with. You'll notice that there are no track listings or liner notes anywhere on the front cover, on the back cover, or on the inside of the gatefold, and that is because all of that was put on the original sleeve where your album would go in right here. Here we have the iconic Rolling Stones tongue logo. We have the track listing and some very sparse liner notes. And on the other side of this little sleeve, we have the band. Ugh, Keith looks so good. So the personnel on Sticky Fingers goes as follows. Of course, you have Mick Jagger on vocals. He also plays the acoustic guitar on Dead Flowers and Moonlight Mile. And then you have Keith Richards filling the role of guitar and love of my life. Yeah, Trevin calls him Meth Head George Harrison, but it's okay. He's just jealous. He's just jealous he has to share me with Keith Richards. And we also have Mick Taylor on guitar, Bill Wyman on bass, and Charlie Watts on drums. This album also features Bobby Keys on sax and Paul Buckmaster doing the string arrangements. We have a number of session players on this thing, including Nicky Hopkins, Billy Preston, and Jack Nitzsche. Please forgive me for pronouncing that name wrong. I know I'm gonna do it. So at this time, Nicky Hopkins had recently played with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and Billy Preston had just played on what was the last released album of the Beatles, Let It Be. At this time, Billy is also still performing with George Harrison. He did the concert for Bangladesh with him. And to think, if Billy were the only keys player on All Things Must Pass, Eric Clapton might not have stolen George's wife. It's all connected, people! Anyway, this record was produced by Jimmy Miller. He was the Rolling Stones' producer through their golden age, from Beggar's Banquet through Goat's Head Soup. And we have one of the best dressed men to ever live, Glyn Johns, on the team of audio engineers. Support the arts. Fuck your hot audio engineers. I am so out of pocket today! So Sticky Fingers marks Mick Taylor's first appearance as a full-time member of the Rolling Stones on a full studio album. Wow, that was a mouthful. I'm shocked I got that all on the first try. Mick T appeared in some spots on Let It Bleed, and he appears in full on the live album Get Your Yayas Out. But this is his first appearance as a full-time Rolling Stone on a full studio album. So right now, it's 1971, and the Rolling Stones have had a rough 2 years. 1969 in particular was just nasty for these guys, between the death of founding member Brian Jones and the Altamont Speedway free concert disaster in December of '69. I've written about Altamont and sort of all of the surrounding free music show disasters of the 60s. If you'd like to read about it, that's linked in my description as well. And this turbulence going on in the Rolling Stones' lives extended into their dealings with their music. The Stones had reached the end of their contracts with Decca and London Records. At first, the Stones were like, yay, we're free to release whatever we want. We can put toilets on all our covers. But of course there was a catch. As Alan Klein was leaving his role as the Rolling Stones' manager, his little parting gift was basically to say, oh, by the way, guys, you signed over all of the American copyrights to your music, yeah, all of your music, to me and my record company. So I get money. Have fun putting toilets on your album covers. Yeah, the Stones were understandably pissed, tried to sue Klein, it didn't work, and things would not be settled until 1984. Ugh. During all of this, the Rolling Stones were recording Sticky Fingers at Muscle Shoals Sound in Alabama, as well as Olympic and Trident Studios in London. And the track listing goes as follows. Side 1 opens with Brown Sugar, followed by Sway, then Wild Horses, Can't You Hear Me Knocking, and side 1 closes with You Gotta Move, which is a cover of a blues standard. Opening up side 2, we have Bitch, followed by I Got the Blues, then Sister Morphine. We'll get to this one in a minute. Followed by Dead Flowers, and rounding out the album, we have the gorgeous Moonlight Mile. In giving you a rundown of the Sticky Fingers track listing, I really can't help but share this chapter of Rolling Stones and of just rock and roll history with you guys. This is Marianne Faithfull, Wild Horses, and the Case of Sister Morphine. So Marianne Faithfull's legacy is tied to the Rolling Stones inextricably. In the 60s, Marianne Faithfull was a singer, a sometimes actress, but perhaps she was most famous for, and still is most famous for, being Mick Jagger's girlfriend and muse from about 1966 to 1970. Marianne was discovered by ex-Stones manager Andrew Oldham, and the Glimmer Twins wrote her first big hit for her, As Tears Go By. What I know her best from, Marianne had a huge hand in how the guy's personal style would evolve through the late 60s. Mick, Keith, Marianne, and Keith's girl at the time, Anita Pallenberg, they were all pretty much the same size, so they all shared clothes, and there are multiple times where you see Marianne photographed in what looks like Mick Jagger's clothes. Super cool. Oh no, just go right ahead, plane. Take your sweet time. In 1967, Marianne's career was almost ruined by her association with the Rolling Stones. She was infamously caught at the first drug bust at Keith Richards' home wearing nothing but, it was either a fur bath mat, a fur blanket, a fur rug, it depends on who you ask. Whatever she was wearing, the tabloids ran wild with it, and the pervasive myth of Marianne and the Mars bar still lingers today. She took this bump in the road with stride, though, and it actually got her some edgier acting roles. I think of Girl on a Motorcycle. Fantastic wardrobe, terrible movie. Marianne's relationship with Mick was, for lack of a better term, toxic. Not quite as toxic as Keith and Anita, but it still wasn't great. All four of them were getting caught up in some harder drugs, and Marianne's addiction proved to be disastrous to her career. This may seem like a tangent, but just bear with me here, alright? I believe that every male music fan has at least one thing that they are just wrong about. And no matter how wrong you prove them to be, they will not back down. For example, Trevin is convinced that Donovan and Jenny Boyd dated. They never actually dated. Donovan just had a big fat crush on Jenny and wrote Jennifer Juniper for her, but they never were actually together. And an ex of mine is convinced that Graham Parsons wrote Wild Horses. He's not totally wrong. Graham Parsons was there while Mick and Keith were writing Wild Horses. Graham was, helping out, playing some chords on the guitar while Mick and Keith were hammering out the lyrics. And the Flying Burrito Brothers released their recording of Wild Horses in 1970, a year before the Stones' recording would come out. But why in the hell would Graham Parsons, an acquaintance at best, be writing a song about Marianne Faithfull's suicide attempt after Mick Jagger broke up with her? Marianne's darkest moment inspired perhaps the most heartfelt and sensitive song in the whole Rolling Stones discography. At least something beautiful came out of something so horrifying. This sweetness, however, is undercut by the case of Sister Morphine. Marianne co-wrote Sister Morphine with Mick and Keith during the Let It Bleed sessions in 1969. It was considered for the track listing of Let It Bleed, but it was ultimately cut and pushed onto the next album. But of course, by then, Mick and Marianne had broken up. She released her recording of Sister Morphine first in 1969, I believe. She was credited on her version of the single's release on Decca Records, but the London Records release, as well as the original release of Sticky Fingers, omitted her name. And Marianne would not see her full writing credits for Sister Morphine until 1994. Marianne's treatment in Wild Horses versus her treatment with the Sister Morphine writing credits is a perfect microcosm of Mick and Marianne's relationship. Marianne is an amazing lady, style icon, muse to the greats, certifiable badass. If you have not checked out her music yet, go do it. So for the release of Sticky Fingers, Brown Sugar with Bitch on the B-side and Wild Horses with Sway on the B-side were the singles. This was the Stones' 9th album in the UK and 11th in the US, and it was their first album to hit #1 in both territories. They'd flirted with it a few times, but Sticky Fingers was the first time they'd actually do it. This was also their first self-released album on Rolling Stones Records, and the first on-album usage of the classic Rolling Stones tongue logo. It's now considered one of the Stones' strongest full album releases, you know, besides greatest hits compilations and all that. I'm surprised it took the Stones until 71 to get a #1 album in both the UK and the US. The Stones are so, I guess, American-oriented. They sound more American than a lot of what the American bands were doing at this time. Sonically, Sticky Fingers is a true return to formula. They were still finding their footing again with Beggar's Banquet. It was, again, a pretty turbulent time to be a Rolling Stone, and things were so messy with the circumstances of Let It Bleed that they really couldn't put out something as cohesive and coherent as they needed to. But with Sticky Fingers, they got that blues back in them, and they got it good. So back when I first started Vinyl Monday in September of 2021, it was just 30-second clips on Instagram. I was a very casual Rolling Stones fan. I knew and loved the hits, and that was just about it. In fact, I used to think that the Stones were, my words, just a singles band, but in the time since first covering Sticky Fingers, I have become a certifiable Rolling Stones superfan. And it's due in part to this record. Also, when I'd first covered this album, Charlie Watts had died not even a month earlier. I believe that a band is only as good as their drummer, and Charlie was really a perfect fit for the Rolling Stones. I couldn't imagine anybody else behind that kit. His standout moments for me are Sway and those really cool rolls on Brown Sugar. They give it just such a fun, funky drive. Listen, I get Brown Sugar stuck in my head every time I'm baking. Sorry, not sorry. I know Mick and Keith get a lot of the spotlight, but Charlie and Bobby Keys really are the MVPs of Sticky Fingers. Brown Sugar and Bitch would be nothing without Bobby Keys. Also, Mick Taylor is underrated as hell. If you asked me, off the top of my head, a list of underrated guitarists, I'd give you Roy Buchanan, Robin Trower, Danny Kirwan, and Mick Taylor. And it's a perfect single. It's the Rolling Stones all wrapped up in about 3 minutes, and it enforced my idea of the Rolling Stones as a singles band. But of course, that was before I even knew what Brown Sugar was about. The Sticky Fingers track that changed my mind about the Rolling Stones was Sway. You get Brown Sugar, which is, very typical of the Rolling Stones, and then there's Sway. It starts the way you think it's going to start, but then the tempo shifts a little bit, it mellows out, kind of calms down, and then the keys come in, and it builds very slowly and very subtly until you get the strings at the end. The strings, they just swell right up, and it's, the first time you hear it, it's magical. And then Charlie's drumming kind of comes out from behind the other instrumentation. Sway is really special. For the first time, the Stones have done something cinematic and grand. It's a lot more mature. Sticky Fingers has a really cool interplay between the fun songs and the more introspective songs. This dynamic carried over into the singles. Of course, you have Brown Sugar with Bitch, and then you get Wild Horses with Sway. The Stones got to show their softer side. Wild Horses might be the greatest breakup song ever written. It says we have a long history, and I'm sorry things turned out the way they did between us. Neither of us were saints, but I'm owning up to all the things I did to hurt you. I have a lot of love for you still, and I wish you nothing but the best. Damn, now that is commendable. And right after that, you have Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which is so hot. Mick's voice, I don't like Mick, but Mick's voice is like accidentally leaving your hand on a hot stove hot. It sears. Mick's hilariously bad Southern accent on Dead Flowers, and Dead Flowers as a whole, used to stick out to me, and not in a good way. It didn't make sense. But then when I did the research for this album, and I found out that they did a lot of the recording in Alabama, made total sense to me. Sticky Fingers, in a lot of ways, is representative of all of the professional and interpersonal sludge these guys would been dealing with for the past 2 years. There are moments like You Gotta Move and Sister Morphine where everyone just sounds exhausted, ran ragged, you're zonked, but in like a cool way. So basically you're Keith Richards. And the closing track, Moonlight Mile, is like you're at the end of a week-long road trip, right? You've been driving for 10 hours straight. You got 1 hour left to go until you're home, but it's gonna be the longest hour of your life because you just hit bumper-to-bumper traffic and it's been pouring rain the whole day and you're so frustrated that you just burst into tears. But it's all kind of okay because you're dressed fabulously and you still have your last cigarette. The string arrangement on Moonlight Mile is bar none. And the first 30 seconds and last 30 seconds of Moonlight Mile are, if you ask me, two of the best moments on any Rolling Stones song. Sticky Fingers is the Rolling Stones coming out on the other side of a hellish 2 years. They didn't get to all come out in one piece, but they're here and they're trying, and they did damn well. It's the scrappy boys from the early days playing the blues, but they're all grown up now. it's bittersweet. My personal favorite tracks on this thing are Sway, Wild Horses, Can't You Hear Me Knocking, Bitch, Dead Flowers, and Moonlight Mile. And that's it. That is Sticky Fingers by the Rolling Stones. What do you think of this album and this period of Rolling Stones history? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing what you guys have to say about the albums that I love. And if you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!